the North Tower being hit at 8:46 in the morning. And about 102 minutes later, after fires traveled around the floors and up the floors in the case of the North Tower, the building did collapse. The South Tower was hit about 15 minutes later, and after only about 56 minutes, it collapses, as the fires were in fact diminishing severely. Gilling noted that he designed the towers to take a hit from a Boeing 707 traveling 600 miles an hour. When he was asked if he considered plane crashes, he cites, "Our analysis indicated the biggest problem would be the fact that all the fuel would dump into the building, but the building structure would still be there." This is FEMA's theory. We have the sagging of the trusses and the pulling away from the column, and then the subsequent pancaking down. Again, the trusses, one after the other, 6 foot 8 inches, every truss, disengaging from the perimeter wall. NIST turns it around and blames the persistence of these connections pulling in the columns, causing the columns to buckle. Now, it's generally more difficult for people to understand that the towers were a controlled demolition because it was so outside of our frame of reference. We'd never seen anything like this. So this, combined with the shock, kept us from being objective. But if you were to plan a fire-induced collapse as a result of airplanes, you'd start the explosions at the point of jet plane impacts. So in World Trade Center 2 and 1, we have all of the key characteristic features of controlled demolitions, but with some of these key differences. We have a beginning of detonation at the point of jet plane impacts, not at the base of the building. In addition, we have not an implosion, but where everything is being exploded outside the footprint. We have squibs, or these explosions, that occur 20, 40, and even 60 stories down below. And as we already discussed the evidence for thermite in the molten metal and in the dust in the iron-rich microspheres. So let's take a look, starting with the sudden onset. And what is the evidence for this, and how is it produced? Produced by the explosions. Now, the city's fire commissioner, Thomas von Essen, requires all of his EMTs and firefighters to record their experiences, about 500 of them, and in 12,000 pages. As it turns out, collected from 2001 to 2002, the New York State Court of Appeals overturns the city's request to hold on to this information against the lawsuit by the New York Times. They failed, and why was the city holding on to this information? Was it because 118 of these firefighters witnessed sounds and flashes of explosions? We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. Initially, just one flash. Then it just kept popping all the way around the building. The building had started to explode. It's like on television, they blow up these buildings. It seemed like it was going all the way around, like a belt. All these explosions. Pop, pop, pop. That's when I heard the building coming down. Saw a brief number of light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. I saw low-level flashes. We actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building. It was blowing out on all 4 sides. With each popping sound, it was initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building. Then it would just go around the building on both sides. I saw a flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Well, you can hear that explosive in this video.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
Does that sound like a fire or collapsing floors? None of these explosions are a part of the official story. Another loud boom at the upper floors, and then there was a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. Before it came down, I saw low-level flashes, flash, flash, flash. And then it looked like the building came down. Did you see any flashes? I said, yeah. I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. What did these guys experience?
We started running, floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was like, it was if they had detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down.
How about the news reporters? What do they say? They tend to tell the truth, as we pointed out earlier, on the first day, and then we don't hear that truth again. What happens to it?
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
I heard a second explosion and another rumble.
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
And all of a sudden, it was this big explosion.
There was another big explosion. An hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
But it was a huge explosion.
Chief Albert Turry said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after there was another explosion in one of the towers here. So according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
It just went ba-boom, it was like a bomb went off, and another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds.
There was a heavy-duty explosion.
Again, none of these explosions are a part of the official story. Now, compare these explosions to a known explosion on the left here. Outward arching streamers, pyroclastic volumes of dust, symmetrical display like a mushroom. Does it look like a gravitational collapse to you? How could explosives be placed in the World Trade Center Twin Towers with 50,000 occupants not knowing about it? Well, this is the floor plan. Let's enlarge it and take a close look. We note that the core structure, the columns of which are immediately adjacent to almost all of the elevators at the lower levels, certainly. If you had access to the elevator hoistway, you would have access to the core columns and beams, and no one would see you. How about an elevator modernization, which we know was going on the 9 months prior to 9/11? Yes, Elevator World, March 2001, documents it. In fact, they were in the middle of this modernization. Ace Elevator had the contract. We're not conspiracy theorists, but it's pretty obvious that somebody needs to be asked some very key questions. There are people who noted that the elevators were locked in turn and that there were guards placed at these locked elevators during the modernization. Wireless detonation is common in the industry. You don't need miles of wire, and you can detonate them remotely with great flexibility, in fact. Well, but is there a precedent? And this tells us that it couldn't have been a controlled demolition because it didn't start at the bottom, right? That's where most controlled demolitions start with buildings. Let's take a look and see if there's another way to do it.
The words of a senior blaster.
We blow the basement, all the columns in the basement. Then we crack it up at the top to get it started. We go every other floor all the way down. Every explosive has a timer on it. That's why it's controlled. When the columns go, each floor goes down and impacts the one below and keeps going.
Mark Loiseau is president of a company called Controlled Demolition.
You don't have to go to the top floor. You can go almost anywhere in the structure, and given the right circumstances, you can release all of that stored energy, converting it into what is called kinetic energy. That's energy in motion, and that's what brings the building down.
Well, here's a 3-story top-down controlled demolition. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3. Now, these are high-energy explosives, C4 and RDX, very loud booms and very visible flashes. Perhaps the reason thermite was used is because they don't have as loud of these explosions like these high-energy explosives. And they don't have the flashes that these do. either. Here's a 20-story middle down controlled demolition. You can start demolitions from wherever you would like. Let's look at the North Tower now. What I want to point out to you is that you're going to see some explosions up at the top of the building, curiously enough. And what's going to happen is this entire section is going to telescope such that half of it, its upper half, is destroyed before there's any movement from the jet plane impacts down. Let's take a look. Here's the first evidence of explosion, and then over here, and then the collapsing. Of course, the violent clouds which are emerging even prior to the collapse. We're going to take a close-up look after this second look. Let's take a look now closer up. Right away, we're seeing clouds forming up here. Well, wait, the collapse is supposed to be just down here. But we have asymmetrical damage to this building, right? The plane went in one side, and yet this complete symmetrical collapse, we'll use in quotes from now on, and let's keep going.
Unexpected to
and one
many
more
of us
time.
in terms of how swiftly
Belts, just like the firemen saw, all the way around the building.
they came down.
The antenna falls
Many of
first,
us, in terms of
before
how swiftly
anything
it
else
happened.
falls, indicating core column damage first. Now take a look at this from the same tower from the bottom, noting the violence underneath the mushroom cloud. The collapse is supposed to be occurring way up here, but down below, as you'll see in this second run, incredible quantities of squibs, explosions bursting out. And on the third time, I'd like to direct your attention to this racing series of explosions down the right side in the corner of this building. About 40 stories below the collapsing building. It gets painfully obvious after a while, doesn't it?
The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the
Note these multiple nodes of these independent explosions.
old demolition,
It's a little different than the North
these
Tower,
old buildings, it folded down on
but it's still incredibly
and it
the
is not
same
there anymore.
after a while, after all of these explosions developed. Do we have a straight-down symmetrical progression of collapse outside the footprint? We had a 207-foot wide building. FEMA tells us, and you can see in this document, that we have a 1,200-foot debris field, equidistant around each tower. Asymmetrical damage, symmetrical distribution, all through the site, in fact, and beyond. Do we have squibs, or these mistimed explosions? Some believe that these might be appropriately timed explosions. Whatever.
In all the videos of the collapses, explosions can be seen bursting from the building 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 and here.
Now, NIST tells us that these are puffs of air being produced by the collapsing building pushing air down the hoistway like a piston. It's got to come out somewhere, right? Well, first of all, these are not puffs of air. They're pulverized building materials. And they occur at 160 to 200 feet, some of them, per second. These velocities are propelled by explosives. 20, 40, and 60 stories below. How can the piston be producing all of that? And in fact, there are these focalized ejections that occur halfway between the corners.